Sophia Chen never imagined that staying up all night watching YouTube tutorials could change her entire life. While her roommate slept peacefully, Sophia sat hunched over her cracked laptop screen, frantically practicing hand movements she'd never needed before. Her fingers stumbled through basic signs, her wrist ached from repetition, and her eyes burned from the blue light. But she couldn't stop. Tomorrow wasn't just another day. Tomorrow she had to be someone she'd never been before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through Sophia's exhaustion at 5:30 a.m. She'd managed exactly 47 minutes of sleep. Her small studio apartment in Queens felt even smaller in the gray pre-dawn light, the Murphy bed still folded down, textbooks scattered across every available surface. Empty ramen containers sat stacked on her desk like a monument to her financial reality. Sophia dragged herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face and staring at her reflection. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes and her black hair hung limp around her shoulders. She looked exactly like what she was, a 24-year-old grad student working 3 jobs to afford tuition at Columbia's social work program. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend and roommate, Amanda. Emergency at the hospital. Can't make my blind date tonight. Please, please, please go to my place? I already confirmed. Guy seems really nice. Sophia typed back quickly while pulling on her subway work uniform. Amanda, I can't afford fancy restaurant food right now. He's paying? Just one favor? I'll cover the rent this month. That stopped Sophia mid-motion. Rent this month meant she could finally replace her worn-out textbooks. Maybe even buy groceries that weren't instant noodles. She sighed, typing her reluctant agreement before grabbing her Metro card and rushing out the door. The subway platform at 6 a.m. was already crowded with early commuters. Sophia squeezed into the train car, her mind already shifting to her first job of the day. 3 mornings a week, she cleaned office buildings in Midtown Manhattan. The pay was decent, but the work was exhausting, and she often found herself scrubbing floors while mentally rehearsing for her afternoon classes. The gleaming lobby of Morrison Financial Tower always made Sophia feel like an intruder. She badged in through the service entrance, nodding to the security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper. The cleaning supply cart waited for her in the basement, loaded with industrial-strength chemicals that made her eyes water. Floor by floor, Sophia worked her way up through the building. Empty cubicles, conference rooms with lingering coffee stains, executive offices with windows that overlook Central Park. She'd often wondered what it would be like to sit in one of those leather chairs, to make decisions that affected thousands of people instead of just trying to scrape together enough money for next semester's tuition. By 10 a.m., she was on the subway again, heading to her second job at a small coffee shop in the village. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was kind but firm about punctuality. Sophia had learned to change clothes in subway bathrooms, transforming from office cleaner to barista in the span of a train ride. "You look tired, honey," Mrs. Patterson said as Sophia tied her apron. "Everything okay?" "Just school stuff," Sophia replied, forcing a smile. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not when she needed these jobs. Mrs. Patterson was understanding, but business was business. The lunch rush hit like a wave. Sophia's hands moved on autopilot, crafting lattes and cappuccinos while her mind wandered to her evening social work class. Professor Williams had assigned a research paper on communication barriers in therapy, focusing on clients with hearing impairments. Sophia had been struggling with the assignment, unsure how to approach such a sensitive topic without lived experience. During her break, she sat in the back alley behind the coffee shop, eating a day-old muffin and scrolling through her phone. A notification popped up from her student loan servicer, payment due in 3 days. Her stomach dropped. She'd forgotten about the automatic withdrawal. Her phone rang. "Sophia? It's Amanda. About tonight." "Amanda, I really don't think I can do this. I'm exhausted and I have homework." "Please, Soph. I know it's last minute, but Dr. Martinez scheduled an emergency surgery, and I can't leave. This guy, Michael Harrison, he seems really sweet. We've been texting for weeks." Sophia rubbed her temples. "What do I even say to him? I don't know anything about you two." "Just be yourself. He's taking you to Bella Vista on the Upper East Side. 7:30. I already told him I'm about your height and have dark hair, so he'll recognize you. Bella Vista? Sophia's voice cracked. She'd walked past that restaurant before, the kind of place where appetizers cost more than her daily food budget. Sophia, I'm begging you. I'll owe you forever. After hanging up, Sophia spent her remaining break time Googling the restaurant's menu. Her anxiety spiked with each dish description. How was she supposed to navigate a world of truffle oil and wine pairings when her culinary expertise extended to microwave dinners? Her afternoon class dragged by slowly. Professor Williams lectured about adaptive communication techniques while Sophia's mind raced with worries about the evening ahead. When he mentioned sign language as a crucial tool for social workers, something clicked in her brain. Sign language bridges more than just communication barriers, Professor Williams explained. It shows clients that you're willing to meet them in their world, to make the effort that others often won't. After class, Sophia rushed home to her apartment. Amanda had left a note on the kitchen counter, along with a dress she'd borrowed from another friend. You're a lifesaver. This should fit. Have fun. The dress was navy blue, simple but elegant. Sophia held it up against herself in the mirror. It would work. Barely. Her scuffed flats would have to do for shoes. She had exactly 2 hours to transform herself from exhausted grad student to someone worthy of Bella Vista. As she showered, Sophia's mind kept returning to Professor Williams' lecture. Something about the evening felt significant, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was just nerves, or maybe it was the growing sense that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying the minimal makeup she owned. Her reflection stared back, uncertain but determined. Tomorrow she would return to her 3 jobs, to textbooks and ramen noodles and student loan payments. But tonight, for just a few hours, she would step into someone else's world. The subway ride to the Upper East Side felt like traveling to another planet. Sophia clutched her small purse, containing exactly $37 in emergency cash and a Metro card with 2 rides left. The dress felt foreign against her skin, and she kept tugging at the hem, worried it was too short or too formal or somehow completely wrong. As the train pulled into her station, Sophia took a deep breath. Whatever happened tonight, she would get through it. She always did. That resilience, forged through years of struggling to build a better life, would carry her through one evening of pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had no idea that across the city, a wealthy father was preparing for his own evening of pretense, hoping to find someone who could see past surfaces to the heart of what really mattered. And she certainly couldn't have predicted that a chance encounter with a 10-year-old boy who communicated with his hands would lead her to spend an entire sleepless night learning a language she'd never spoken before. Bella Vista sat like a glowing jewel on East 79th Street, its warm amber light spilling onto the sidewalk through floor-to-ceiling windows. Sophia paused outside, watching well-dressed couples glide through the entrance, while a doorman in a crisp uniform held the heavy glass door. Her reflection in the window showed a young woman who looked the part, but her racing heart betrayed how out of place she felt. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The maitre d' approached with practiced elegance. "Good evening, miss. Do you have a reservation?" "Harrison," Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. 7:30. He consulted his leather-bound book, then gestured toward the dining room. "Right this way." Mr. Harrison requested a quiet table. Sophia followed him through the restaurant, past tables adorned with crisp white linens and flickering candles, the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle clink of crystal glasses. Everything seemed to shimmer with understated luxury that made her studio apartment feel like another universe entirely. They stopped at a corner table where a man sat checking his phone. He looked up as they approached, and Sophia's first thought was that Amanda had excellent taste. Michael Harrison appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked expensive, but not flashy. "Michael?" Sophia extended her hand, hoping he wouldn't notice the slight tremor in her fingers. He stood, shaking her hand with a warm smile. "You must be Amanda. It's so nice to finally meet in person." Sophia's stomach lurched. She'd forgotten that she was supposed to be Amanda tonight. "Yes, hi. Sorry I'm a few minutes late." "No worries at all. I actually just got here myself." He pulled out her chair, a gesture that felt both foreign and pleasant. "I hope this place is okay." I wanted somewhere we could actually talk without shouting over loud music. As Sophia settled into her seat, she noticed something that made her pause. At the table next to theirs, a man in a navy sweater sat across from a young boy who was drawing intently on the paper tablecloth. The boy's concentration was absolute, his small hands moving with surprising precision as he sketched what looked like a rocket ship. The waiter appeared, offering them water and bread. Sophia accepted both gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since her day-old muffin at lunch. Michael seemed relaxed, asking about her work at the hospital. Amanda's work, she reminded herself. The emergency room must be incredibly demanding, he said, buttering a piece of bread. I have so much respect for healthcare workers. Sophia nodded, trying to recall everything Amanda had told her about her job. It can be intense, but it's rewarding. Every day is different. That much was true, even if she was talking about the wrong job entirely. Their conversation flowed more easily than Sophia had expected. Michael had a gentle way of asking questions that didn't feel like an interrogation. He worked in renewable energy consulting, traveling frequently to assess wind and solar projects. He spoke passionately about sustainable development, and Sophia found herself genuinely interested despite her nerves. What got you interested in medicine? He asked as their appetizers arrived. Sophia's mind went blank. She couldn't very well explain Amanda's journey to becoming a nurse when she barely knew the details herself. Instead, she found herself drawing from her own experience. I've always been drawn to helping people who feel overlooked, I guess. People who need someone to really listen to them. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her social work studies were rooted in the same impulse, even if the path was different. As they talked, Sophia became increasingly aware of the table next to them. The boy was still drawing, but she noticed something unusual about the interaction between him and his father. They weren't speaking aloud. Instead, the man's hands moved in fluid, deliberate gestures. Sign language. The boy responded with his own hand movements, animated and quick. His face lit up with excitement as he showed his father the drawing, pointing to different elements while his hands described details that Sophia couldn't understand but could feel the enthusiasm behind. She tried to focus on Michael's story about a wind farm project in Montana, but her attention kept drifting to the silent conversation happening mere feet away. There was something beautiful about the way they communicated, a rhythm and flow that seemed almost musical. I'm sorry, Michael said, following her gaze. Am I boring you with work talk? Not at all, Sophia said quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. I noticed the father and son next to us. They're using sign language. Michael glanced over discreetly. That's really sweet. Not something you see very often in restaurants like this. No, Sophia agreed, but something in the interaction nagged at her. The boy seemed perfectly content, even joyful. But there was something in the father's posture that suggested tension. He kept glancing around the restaurant, as if measuring other people's reactions to his son. Their main courses arrived, and Sophia forced herself to concentrate on Michael and their conversation. He was telling her about his sister's wedding next month, how he was dreading the inevitable questions about when he was going to settle down. Family events can be complicated, Sophia said, thinking of her own relatives who constantly asked when she was going to get a real job instead of staying in school forever. Exactly. It's like everyone becomes an expert on your life choices. Michael laughed, then his expression grew more serious. Do you ever feel pressure to, prove yourself? Like people are always evaluating whether you measure up? The question hit closer to home than he could have known. Sophia's entire life felt like a constant evaluation, by professors, employers, loan officers, even herself. Every day, she said honestly. At the neighboring table, the boy had finished his drawing and was showing it to his father with obvious pride. The man's face softened as he examined the artwork, his hands moving in what Sophia assumed were words of praise. There was something tender about the moment that made her chest tighten. That's really beautiful, she murmured, more to herself than to Michael. What is? Just the way they communicate. It's like they have their own private language. Michael smiled. You have a kind heart. I noticed that from your messages, too. You always ask thoughtful questions. Sophia's guilt intensified. She was impersonating someone else, sitting in a restaurant she couldn't afford, pretending to be a nurse instead of a struggling grad student. Yet somehow, the conversation felt more genuine than many she'd had with people who knew her real identity. The boy next to them stood up suddenly, clutching his drawing. He walked over to their table, his father half rising in apparent concern. The child held out his artwork to Sophia, his eyes bright with the universal desire for approval that transcends language barriers. The drawing showed a detailed rocket ship surrounded by stars and planets. In the corner, he'd written Mars Mission in careful block letters. Sophia's heart melted at the obvious effort and imagination. "This is incredible," she said to the boy, genuinely amazed by the detail. "You're a fantastic artist." The boy beamed, then looked back at his father, his hands moving rapidly. The man approached their table, apologizing in a low voice. "I'm sorry. He gets excited about his drawings and wants to share them with everyone." "Please don't apologize," Sophia said. "It's a wonderful drawing." "He's very talented." The man's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. "Thank you. That's very kind of you to say." There was something in his voice, a note of relief or gratitude, that seemed disproportionate to her simple compliment. Sophia found herself studying his face, handsome in an understated way, with gray eyes that held both warmth and wariness. The boy tugged on his father's sleeve, then pointed to Sophia and signed something quickly. The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "He wants to know if you like space," the man translated. "It's his current obsession." "I love space," Sophia said to the boy, who grinned and launched into what was clearly an enthusiastic explanation about rockets and planets, his hands flying through signs she couldn't interpret but whose meaning was crystal clear through his expression alone. Michael watched the exchange with interest. "He's quite the little scientist." The man nodded, pride evident in his features. "He wants to be an astronaut. I keep telling him it's a perfectly reasonable career goal." Sophia found herself smiling. "It absolutely is. The world needs more dreamers." Something passed between her and the man in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, of shared understanding about supporting someone else's dreams, even when the path seemed impossible. "Well, we should let you get back to your dinner," the man said, but there was reluctance in his voice. "Thank you for being so kind to my son." "Thank you for sharing your artwork with me," Sophia said to the boy, who waved enthusiastically before following his father back to their table. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching her face. "That was really sweet of you. He's just a kid with big dreams. There's nothing sweeter than that." "You'd be a wonderful mother someday," Michael said softly. The comment should have felt premature, inappropriate for a first date. Instead, it felt like a glimpse into a future that both terrified and tempted Sophia. A future where she wasn't constantly worried about money, where she could afford to be generous with her time and attention, where someone's dreams mattered more than the next paycheck. As they finished their meal, Sophia found herself stealing glances at the father and son next to them. Their connection was so evident, so pure, that it made her think about all the ways people failed to really see each other. How often had she walked past someone who needed acknowledgement, too caught up in her own struggles to notice? When the check came, Michael paid without fanfare, waving away Sophia's half-hearted offer to split it. Outside the restaurant, they stood under the glow of the street lamps, the evening air carrying the scent of approaching autumn. "I had a really wonderful time tonight," Michael said. "Would you like to get coffee sometime this week?" Sophia's throat tightened. By this week, Amanda would be back from her emergency, and this borrowed life would be over. "I'd like that," she said anyway, knowing it was impossible. As they parted ways, Sophia couldn't shake the image of the boy's excited signs, the father's careful translations, the obvious love between them that needed no words at all. Something about their interaction had awakened a curiosity in her that went beyond mere academic interest. Walking to the subway, Sophia pulled out her phone and, almost without thinking, searched for Basic Sign Language Tutorial. The first video appeared, and she clicked play, watching as hands moved through simple greetings and common phrases. She had no idea why she was doing it. She had no expectation of ever seeing that father and son again. But something about their silent conversation had planted a seed, and Sophia Chen had never been able to resist the urge to learn. 3 months later, Sophia Chen walked through the gleaming corridors of Bennett Industries with a confidence she'd never possessed before. Her employee badge read, Sophia Chen, ASL Interpreter and Accessibility Coordinator, and every time she saw it, she still felt a flutter of disbelief. The corner office with windows overlooking Central Park wasn't hers, but the smaller space next to it was complete with proper lighting for video calls and a collection of ASL dictionaries that had become her constant companions. The morning sun streamed through her office window as she reviewed her schedule. 3 interpreter sessions, a meeting with HR about expanding the company's accessibility programs, and lunch with the new deaf employee who'd been hired for the marketing team. Her life had transformed so completely that sometimes she had to remind herself it was real. A gentle knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. David Bennett stood in the doorway, Tommy beside him wearing a backpack covered in NASA patches. The boy's face lit up when he saw Sophia, his hands immediately moving in excited greeting. "Good morning, Professor Sophia," he signed, using the title he'd given her after their first real conversation. "Good morning, Astronaut Tommy," she signed back, her movements now fluid and natural. "Ready for another day of space research?" The boy giggled, a sound that still made David's face soften with wonder. Tommy's selective mutism hadn't disappeared overnight, but his world had expanded exponentially. He spoke with his voice to Sophia now, tentative, but growing stronger each week. The trust that had developed between them had become a bridge to verbal communication that surprised everyone, including his therapists. "Sophia, do you have a minute?" David asked. "I wanted to run something by you before the board meeting." She nodded, gesturing for them to sit in the comfortable chairs she'd arranged specifically for conversations with Tommy. David had learned to include his son in more aspects of his life, recognizing that Tommy's perspective often provided insights that the adults missed. "The board approved the proposal," David said, his voice barely containing excitement. "We're establishing the Bennett Foundation for Communication Accessibility. Full funding for ASL education programs, interpreter training scholarships, and assistive technology development." Sophia's hands flew to her mouth. They'd been working on the proposal for weeks, but she hadn't dared hope it would be approved so quickly. "David, that's incredible. This could help so many families." Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve, signing rapidly. David smiled and translated. "He wants to know if this means more kids will learn to talk with their hands like you did." "Exactly like that," Sophia signed to Tommy, then spoke aloud for David's benefit. "We're going to teach people that communication comes in many forms, and all of them are valuable." The transformation in their relationship had been gradual but profound. What had started as a deception had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. David had initially struggled with the guilt of his test, but Sophia had helped him understand that intentions mattered less than actions. What they chose to do with their connection was what truly counted. "There's something else," David said, his voice taking on a different tone. "The foundation needs a director, someone who understands both the academic side and the practical applications, someone who's lived the experience of learning ASL for the right reasons." Sophia's heart began to race. "David, I'm not qualified to run a foundation. I've been doing this for 3 months. "You're more qualified than anyone else I know," he said firmly. "You learned an entire language in one night because you cared about a little boy you'd met for 5 minutes. You've revolutionized our company's approach to accessibility. You see possibilities where others see obstacles." Tommy climbed onto his father's lap, something that still amazed Sophia. The boy who had been so guarded that first evening now sought physical comfort easily, his trust rebuilt through patience and consistency. "What do you think, Tommy?" Sophia signed. "Should I help your dad with this big project?" The boy's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Yes, you have to. Then you can teach everyone to be friends like us." The simplicity of his reasoning cut straight to the heart of what they were trying to accomplish. Building bridges between different worlds, creating understanding where there had been barriers. "I'll need to finish my master's degree first," Sophia said carefully. "And I'd want to spend time in the deaf community, learning from people who've been advocating for accessibility much longer than I have." "The foundation can support your education," David said. "In fact, we'd prefer it. This isn't about replacing existing advocates. It's about amplifying their voices and providing resources they've been requesting for years." Sophia looked out the window at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there were students like her, working multiple jobs to afford their education. There were parents like David, desperate to connect with their children, but unsure how. There were kids like Tommy, brilliant and loving, who just needed someone to meet them in their own language. "I have one condition," she said finally. "Name it." "Amanda gets the first interpreter training scholarship. She's the one who made this all possible, even if she doesn't know it." David laughed. I think we can arrange that. Though you might have to explain to her why a foundation she's never heard of wants to pay for her ASL classes. Quote, Tommy wiggled in his father's arms, then signed something that made David's expression grow serious. Sophia watched as the boy's hands moved carefully, deliberately. He says, David translated, his voice thick with emotion, that before you came, he thought nobody would ever understand him completely. Now he knows that people can learn to listen with more than just their ears. Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. In trying to help Tommy communicate with the world, she discovered her own voice. The scared grad student who had stumbled into a life-changing evening had become someone who could advocate for others, who could build programs and change policies. There's one more thing, David said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Sophia's breath caught. I know this isn't traditional. I know we've done everything backwards. But these past 3 months have shown me that the best things in life come when you're not following a script. Tommy bounced excitedly, clearly in on the secret. His hands moved rapidly. Say yes! Say yes! Sophia, David continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You've taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing world. It's about building a new world together. Will you marry me? The ring was simple, elegant, with a small diamond that caught the morning light. But what took Sophia's breath away wasn't the jewelry. It was the sight of Tommy holding a piece of paper with careful drawings of stick figures. A tall man, a woman with dark hair, and a small boy, all holding hands under a rainbow. In the corner, he'd written, My New Family, in his precise block letters. Yes, Sophia whispered, then signed it for Tommy, who launched himself into her arms with a whoop of joy. As David slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia thought about the chain of coincidences that had brought them together. Amanda's emergency at the hospital, the mistaken table assignment, the YouTube videos that had kept her awake all night. Any one of those elements could have gone differently, and she might never have met the boy who would change her understanding of communication, or the man who would become her partner in expanding that understanding to others. 6 months later, Sophia stood at the front of a packed auditorium at Columbia University, defending her master's thesis on, quote, Breaking Barriers, ASL as a Bridge to Inclusive Communication. In the audience sat David and Tommy, Amanda and Michael, who had indeed found each other again once the truth came out, her professors, and dozens of members of the deaf community who would become her mentors and friends. Her thesis advisor had called her research groundbreaking, but Sophia knew it was really just the beginning. The Bennett Foundation was launching its first pilot program next month, bringing ASL education to public schools across 5 states. Tommy was thriving in his new school, where half the students were learning sign language alongside traditional subjects. And Sophia was preparing to start her PhD, focused on accessibility policy and communication advocacy. That evening, as they walked through Central Park together, Tommy ran ahead to feed the ducks while David and Sophia talked about their upcoming wedding. They'd decided to have both a spoken ceremony and a signed one, with interpreters ensuring that everyone could participate fully. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't sat at our table that night? David asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sophia considered the question. I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not the same way, but... She watched Tommy carefully signaling to a duck, completely absorbed in his one-sided conversation. Some connections are too important to miss. Tommy ran back to them, his hands moving excitedly as he described his conversation with the duck. Sophia translated for David, though he was understanding more and more of his son's signs each day. The 3 of them continued their walk as the sun set over the city, a family built not on blood or chance, but on the deliberate choice to learn each other's languages, both spoken and unspoken. Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from one of her foundation colleagues, first scholarship recipient just passed her ASL certification. She says she's ready to change the world. Sophia smiled, typing back, Tell her the world is ready for her. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tommy pointed them out one by one, his hands painting constellations in the air while his voice, growing stronger each day, named them aloud. At that moment, Sophia understood that learning to communicate wasn't just about mastering signs or words. It was about choosing, again and again, to reach across the spaces between people and find the connections that make us whole. The scared young woman who had learned sign language in a single desperate night had become someone who could teach others that every barrier could be crossed, every silence could be filled with meaning, and every chance encounter had the potential to change not just individual lives, but the world itself. A year later, the Bennett Foundation's annual gala filled the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dendor with hundreds of guests. Sophia moved through the crowd in an elegant emerald dress, her wedding ring catching the light as her hands gracefully interpreted conversations between deaf and hearing attendees. The event had raised over $2 million for accessibility programs, but more importantly, it had created a community. Mrs. Bennett called a familiar voice. Sophia turned to see Dr. Martinez, Amanda's supervisor from the hospital, approaching with a young girl beside him. "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Isabella. She's been asking about the sign language classes at her school." The 8-year-old's eyes were bright with curiosity as she attempted to sign hello with careful, practiced movements. Sophia responded in kind, then spoke aloud for the benefit of those around them. "Isabella wants to be a doctor like her father, but she also wants to help kids who can't hear," Dr. Martinez explained. "She says it's important that doctors know how to talk with their hands too." Sophia's heart swelled. This was exactly what they'd hoped for. A generation growing up seeing ASL not as a limitation to overcome, but as another beautiful way humans connected with each other. Tommy bounded over, now 11 and several inches taller, wearing a junior astronaut uniform complete with NASA patches earned from the Foundation's STEM accessibility program. His selective mutism was largely behind him, though he still preferred signing when excited or overwhelmed. The combination of both languages had given him confidence rather than confusion. "Sophia, Dad's about to give his speech," he signed and spoke simultaneously, a skill that continued to amaze the adults around him. "He's really nervous. You should go hold his hand." Isabella giggled at Tommy's directness, and Sophia noticed the two children naturally falling into communication that blended signs and words. The next generation was already rewriting the rules about what normal conversation looked like. David stood at the podium, adjusting his tie nervously. Public speaking had never been his strength, but leading the foundation had pushed him far outside his comfort zone. Sophia made her way to the side of the stage, where she could offer silent encouragement. 3 years ago, David began, his voice carrying across the elegant hall, "I thought I knew what it meant to be a good father. I provided for my son, protected him, gave him every material advantage possible, but I was failing him in the most fundamental way. I wasn't truly listening." The audience was riveted as David continued. "It took a remarkable woman learning an entire language overnight to show me that love isn't about what we think someone needs. It's about meeting them where they are and learning to speak their language, literally and figuratively." Sophia felt her eyes mist as David's gaze found hers across the room. Even after all this time, the memory of that frantic night of YouTube tutorials and cramped fingers still felt surreal. Tonight we celebrate not just the Foundation's achievements, but the thousands of people who've chosen to cross bridges instead of building walls. Every interpreter we've trained, every classroom that's embraced dual language learning, every workplace that's become truly inclusive, these represent individual decisions to value human connection over convenience. The applause was thunderous, but Sophia noticed the most meaningful response came from the deaf community members whose hands moved in a visual celebration that needed no sound. After the speeches, Sophia found herself in conversation with Marcus Washington, a deaf architect whose firm had just won the contract to design the Foundation's new headquarters. His interpreter, a young woman named Keisha, had been one of their first scholarship recipients. "Mrs. Bennett," Marcus signed, with Keisha voicing his words, "I wanted you to know that my nephew started in your ASL program last year. For the first time, he feels proud of being deaf instead of ashamed." The weight of that statement settled over Sophia. When she'd first stayed up all night learning signs, her only goal had been not to embarrass herself at breakfast. She'd never imagined that her actions would ripple outward to touch the life of a child she'd never met. "Marcus is designing the new building with something special," Keisha continued interpreting. "A reflection garden where people can practice sign language without worrying about mistakes. A safe space for learning." Quote. Tommy appeared at Sophia's elbow, tugging gently on her dress. "There's someone here who wants to meet you," he signed privately, his expression unusually serious for a child at a party. He led her toward a quiet corner where an elderly woman sat alone, her gnarled hands resting on a walking cane. Sophia recognized her immediately from photographs. Drive. Eleanor Hartwick, the pioneering advocate who'd fought for deaf rights for over 60 years. Dr. Hartwick, Sophia said, bending down to make eye contact. It's such an honor to meet you. The elderly woman's face crinkled into a smile as her hands moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd been signing for decades. Tommy stepped forward to interpret, having become remarkably skilled at bridging conversations between the generations. She says, Tommy translated carefully, that she's been watching what you and Dad have built. She's proud that someone who learned ASL for love instead of obligation is now leading the charge for change. Dr. Hartwick continued singing, and Tommy's young face grew solemn with the importance of conveying her words accurately. She wants you to know that the deaf community has been waiting a long time for allies who understand that accessibility isn't charity, it's justice. Sophia felt the full weight of the responsibility she'd inherited. This wasn't just about her family's journey anymore. It was about honoring the decades of activism that had come before and ensuring that the momentum continued forward. Tommy, please tell Dr. Hartwick that I promise to keep learning, to keep listening, and to never forget that I'm following in the footsteps of giants. The elderly woman reached out and squeezed Sophia's hand, her eyes twinkling with approval before she began signing again. She says the future is in good hands, Tommy interpreted, then added his own observation. I think she means that literally, because your hands are really good at signing now. The innocence of his addiction made both women laugh, and Sophia realized this was what they were fighting for. A world where a deaf elder and a hearing advocate could share joy across language barriers, facilitated by a child who saw communication as an adventure rather than an obstacle. As the evening wound down, Sophia stood on the museum steps with David and Tommy, watching guests stream out into the New York night. Many were continuing their conversations in sign language, the visual symphony of their hands creating a kind of silent celebration under the streetlights. Do you think we're making a real difference? Sophia asked David, leaning against his shoulder. Look around, he said softly. 6 months ago, most of these people didn't know basic fingerspelling. Tonight, they're having philosophical discussions in ASL. If that's not transformation, I don't know what is. Tommy yawned hugely, the excitement of the evening finally catching up with him. Can we go home now? I want to practice the new signs Dr. Hartwick taught me before I forget them. As they walked to their car, Sophia reflected on how completely her definition of home had changed. It wasn't the cramped studio apartment in Queens, though she still maintained connections to that neighborhood through the Foundation's community programs. It wasn't David's penthouse, elegant as it was. Home had become anywhere the three of them were together, creating understanding where none had existed before. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Saw the coverage of tonight's gala on the news. You looked like you belonged on that stage. Remember when you thought you were too broke to eat at Bella Vista? Look at you now, changing the world one sign at a time. Sophia smiled, typing back, remember when you had an emergency surgery and asked me to take your place? Best favor anyone ever asked me for. The response came quickly. Pretty sure that favor saved both our lives. Mine because I met Michael. Yours because you found your calling. Destiny works in mysterious ways. As their car pulled into traffic, Sophia watched the city lights blur past the window. Tomorrow, she would return to the Foundation offices, where a dozen new projects waited for her attention. There were schools in rural areas requesting ASL programs, corporations seeking accessibility consultations, and researchers proposing studies on early childhood language development. Each represented another opportunity to build bridges, to create understanding, to honor the lesson that one night of determined learning had taught her. Tommy had fallen asleep in the back seat, his hands still moving slightly as he dreamed, probably practicing the signs Dr. Hartwick had shared with him. David reached over and took Sophia's hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that needed no translation. In the quiet of the moving car, Sophia understood that her transformation wasn't complete. It was ongoing. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunities to learn, new ways to expand her understanding of what it meant to truly communicate. The frightened young woman who had frantically studied YouTube videos until dawn had discovered that the greatest gift wasn't learning to sign, but learning to see beyond her own limited perspective and embrace the infinite ways people could connect with each other. 2 years later, Sophia stood before the United Nations General Assembly, her hands steady as she delivered her keynote address on global accessibility initiatives. The simultaneous interpretation booth buzzed with activity as her words were translated into dozens of languages. But what made the moment extraordinary was the visual interpretation happening on stage beside her. Rahul Sharma, a deaf advocate from Mumbai, signed her speech in International Sign, creating a bridge that transcended spoken language entirely. "Communication is not a privilege," Sophia declared, her voice carrying to the furthest corners of the assembly hall. "It is a fundamental human right. When we create barriers to understanding, we impoverish not just individuals, but entire societies." In the gallery above, David watched with Tommy, now 13, and serving as a youth ambassador for the foundation. The boy had grown into a thoughtful teenager who moved seamlessly between worlds, equally comfortable addressing corporate executives about accessibility needs and teaching sign language to preschoolers in Harlem community centers. The Bennett Foundation had evolved far beyond its original scope. What had begun as a single program in New York now operated in 43 countries, partnering with local organizations to develop culturally appropriate communication resources. Sophia's PhD dissertation on universal design in human connection had become required reading in social work programs worldwide. After her speech, Sophia was approached by Minister Chen Wei from Singapore's Ministry of Education. Through an interpreter, he explained his government's plan to make their nation the first in Southeast Asia to offer bilingual education in spoken Mandarin and Singapore Sign Language. "Dr. Bennett," the interpreter conveyed, "Minister Chen wishes to know if the foundation would consider establishing a regional training center in Singapore. He believes your model could transform education throughout the region." Sophia's mind raced with possibilities. Each expansion brought new cultural considerations, new challenges, new opportunities to learn. The girl who had once worried about affording textbooks now found herself making decisions that could impact millions of lives. "Tell Minister Chen I'm honored by the proposal," Sophia replied. "I'd like to visit Singapore next month to meet with local deaf community leaders and educators. Any program we develop must be shaped by the people it serves, not imposed from outside." The diplomatic reception that followed buzzed with conversations in multiple languages and modalities. Sophia moved through the crowd, her trained eye automatically noting accessibility gaps and opportunities for improvement. After years of advocacy work, she could walk into any space and immediately assess how welcoming it was for people with different communication needs. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo University approached with exciting news about their longitudinal study on children who learned ASL alongside spoken language from infancy. The preliminary results showed enhanced cognitive flexibility, improved spatial reasoning, and greater empathy scores compared to monolingual control groups. "Your foundation's early childhood programs are producing remarkable outcomes," Dr. Tanaka explained through her interpreter. "These children aren't just bilingual. They're developing enhanced social-emotional intelligence." Sophia felt a familiar thrill at the confirmation of what she'd observed anecdotally. Children who grew up with multiple forms of communication seemed more attuned to nonverbal cues, more patient with misunderstandings, more creative in solving interpersonal problems. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tommy. "Dad says you're networking like a boss up there. Mrs. Patterson from the coffee shop is here. She wants to tell you something important." Sophia scanned the crowd and spotted her former employer from the village coffee shop, now in her 70s but still sharp-eyed and energetic. Mrs. Patterson had become an unexpected ally, transforming her small business into a deaf-friendly space after learning about Sophia's work. "Sophia, dear," Mrs. Patterson embraced her warmly. "I had to come tell you personally. We just hired our third deaf barista. The whole neighborhood is learning basic signs now. You should see the smile on customers' faces when they order an ASL." Quote. The ripple effects continued to amaze Sophia. What had started with one desperate night of learning had somehow touched a small coffee shop in Greenwich Village, changing the daily experiences of deaf customers who had previously struggled to feel welcome in food service establishments. During the evening's cultural program, Sophia watched a performance by the Gallaudet University Theatre Troupe. Their interpretation of Shakespearean sonnets through visual poetry was breathtaking, hands creating metaphors that seemed to hang in the air, facial expressions conveying emotional nuances that went beyond the original text. The lead performer, Maria Santos, approached Sophia afterward. Through Fluid ASL, she expressed gratitude for the Foundation's arts accessibility grants that had made the international tour possible. "You changed my life," Maria signed, her movements elegant and precise. "3 years ago, I thought deaf actors could only perform for deaf audiences. Now we're proving that visual storytelling transcends language barriers." Sophia responded in kind, her signing now natural and expressive after years of daily practice. "You're the one changing perceptions. Every performance opens minds and hearts." The evening concluded with an unexpected announcement. The UN Secretary-General took the stage to reveal that Sophia had been nominated for the UNESCO Prize for Education, recognizing her innovative work in inclusive communication pedagogy. Dr. Bennett's approach represents a paradigm shift, the Secretary-General stated. Rather than treating communication differences as deficits to be overcome, she has shown us how diversity in human expression enriches our collective understanding. The applause was thunderous, but Sophia felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of recognition. 5 years ago, she had been cleaning office buildings at dawn and serving coffee by afternoon. The trajectory from struggling graduate student to international advocate still felt surreal. Backstage, David and Tommy waited with congratulations and gentle teasing about her shocked expression during the announcement. "You looked like someone had just told you that gravity was optional," Tommy signed with theatrical flair, making his father laugh. "I felt like it," Sophia admitted. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real." "It's real because you made it real," David said, pulling her close. "Every late-night studying, every difficult conversation, every time you choose courage over comfort, this is what those choices built." Their hotel suite overlooked the East River, the lights of Manhattan twinkling across the water like earthbound stars. Sophia stood at the window, holding the evening's program and thinking about all the people whose stories had intersected with theirs. Amanda had completed her interpreter certification and now managed the Foundation's healthcare accessibility program, ensuring that deaf patients received quality care in their preferred language. Michael had left Renewable Energy Consulting to establish a nonprofit focused on environmental justice in deaf communities, recognizing that accessibility and sustainability were interconnected challenges. Mrs. Patterson's coffee shop had become a model for small business accessibility, hosting monthly community sign language practice sessions that brought together neighbors who had lived side by side for years without truly connecting. Dr. Hartwick, now in her 80s, continued mentoring young advocates while serving on the Foundation's advisory board. Her presence at meetings reminded everyone that they were part of a larger movement with deep historical roots. Even the original hostess from Bella Vista had reached out after seeing Sophia's UN speech on the news. She revealed that she had dyslexia and had struggled with names and reading reservation lists her entire career. Sophia's visibility had inspired her to advocate for workplace accommodations, transforming her relationship with her employer and her own self-perception. Tommy appeared beside Sophia at the window, having grown tall enough to rest his chin on her shoulder. "Are you thinking about how weird it is that one wrong table changed everything?" he asked, speaking aloud in the privacy of their family space. "Among other things," Sophia replied. "I'm thinking about how many people tried to learn sign language because they saw our story, how many kids like you felt less alone, how many parents like your dad realized they could do better, and how many people learned that love means learning each other's languages," Tommy added, with the wisdom of someone who had grown up bridging worlds. David joined them at the window, wrapping his arms around both of them. The view stretched out before them, a city of 8 million people, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own capacity for transformation. "What's next?" David asked, though he was smiling as if he already knew the answer would be ambitious. Sophia leaned into his warmth, feeling Tommy's steady presence beside her. "Next, we keep learning, we keep building bridges. We keep proving that understanding is always possible when people choose to meet each other halfway." In the reflection of the window, she could see their small family, different backgrounds, different starting points, but united by the choice to grow beyond their individual limitations. The scared young woman who had learned sign language in desperation had become someone who could stand before world leaders and speak with authority about human connection. But more importantly, she had become someone who understood that transformation was not a destination but a daily practice of choosing love over fear, understanding over judgment, connection over isolation. The city lights sparkled below them like possibilities waiting to be discovered, and Sophia knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to learn, new chances to prove that the distance between any two people could be bridged with patience, determination, and the courage to speak in languages beyond words. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.